friends are synths.
So we've come to the end of another year. Somehow, against all odds, the human race has miraculously survived to complete another 365-day rotation around the sun. With that said, it does feel like we haven't really seen the sun here in Glasgow, Scotland for quite some time. As you can probably tell from my get-up here, it is fucking freezing and I'm refusing to turn on the heating because it's so expensive, and also, to be honest, I've spent far too much money over the past year buying synthesizers. Now, this is the time of year where every synthy YouTuber, wannabe influencer type will be regaling you with videos talking about all of the gear that they've bought or been given for free in 2022, about the top 10 lists of things that you could buy your synthesis partner for Christmas, or maybe even, you know, just telling us about the 500 new things that are coming out in 2023 that we're going to have to buy. And I decided that I wasn't going to be part of that crass consumerism, and instead I was going to do a video talking about all of the things that I am going to sell in 2023. Now, in all seriousness, I do have this kind of awful tendency to get fixated on the idea of connecting up different bits of gear just to see if I can do it. And I'll sink a whole load of money into these projects without really ever thinking about whether or not I'm actually going to make music with them regularly at the end. So, you know, my curiosity tends to have a big hit on my bank balance. At the end of these projects, once I've got everything working, the reaction often tends to just be, ah, cool, so that worked. And then these devices sit on my shelves and gather dust for some years. So I've been looking around my studio, all of the stuff that I've accumulated over the past 10 to 15 years doing the kind of electronic music thing, and identifying some of these devices that really is probably just time for me to let go. I'm making this, in all honesty, to get some kind of accountability, so that if in the next 6 months you see me and I'm playing with one of these devices that I've identified as, you know, for the chopping block, then I want you to leave a comment on that video going, what the fuck is that? I thought you said you were going to sell that.
You lied to us.
I want you to shame me, essentially, because if you don't, well, I'm never going to sell this stuff, and in a month or two I'll be like, oh, well, maybe I could just keep that wee sequencer, and no, that's not what I want to have happen. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the list of things that I'm planning to sell. And the first one is none other than the, drum roll please. I don't actually know if I can get a royalty-free drum roll, so fuck it. I'm getting rid of the OP1. Now, when I first bought the OP1 a couple of years ago, I did a video talking about why I'd bought it, but the gist was, or is, that I wanted something that was both portable, that I could take away with me on holiday or to the park or to sit on the couch, really, and make a whole bunch of music with. But I also wanted to experiment with the unique kind of workflow and sequencers that are in the OP1. Now, there's no denying that I've enjoyed using the OP1 whilst I have. I've written about 25 tracks or something that I quite enjoyed, and I, you know, loved playing about with the esoteric and idiosyncratic nature of the production on the OP1 itself. However, in practice, I've found that often the limitations of the device become more kind of frustrating than inspiring, and over time, the amount I've been using this thing has kind of dropped off a cliff. Secondly, the portability of the OP1 is also another issue. Now, there is no doubting that the OP1 is very portable in the sense it's got a battery and you can create all sorts of music just within the box. However, in practice, I've found that the memory limitations in there mean that you can't really take it away for a week on holiday or something and create a whole album without really trying to work around the kind of internal memory and the way the tape's laid out and everything like that. So you really need to have a computer or like something else to drag the files off, and honestly, it just isn't quite as portable as I wanted, at least in that regard. Also related to the portability is the cost. Now, I say that because I've actually, I don't think, ever even taken it out of the house at this point, because I'm terrified that I'd destroy it or I'd drop it or something awful happens to it and it costs so much money that I would never replace it. So it kind of sits there on the shelf all of the time, looking at me going, you paid £1,300 for me. Why don't you use me more often? Think about all the things you could have bought with that money. I'm just depreciating in value with every day. And in all honesty, the cost really has been an issue. I've never really been able to get over it, and it's always lurking there in the back of my mind, whether I'm using the OP1, whether I'm not, whether I've bought a case and a deck saver and a whole roll of bubble wrap to try and protect it. It's just a whole kind of weight on my shoulders that I want to cast off. And so the OP1 is getting the chop. Second on the list of bits of gear that I am planning or committing to get rid of in 2023 is the OPZ Now, when I was thinking about this video, I did begin to wonder whether or not this would seem like a bad day for teenage engineering. But actually, it's not a bad day for them at all, because they've already got the money for these things. It's really a bad day for me, who's going to lose hundreds and hundreds of pounds selling on these things on the second-hand market. So that's actually quite a depressing thought. Anyway, even though I'm selling on the OPZ, I actually still really like it. There's something about it that I find really quite pleasing, and it has all of the portability that I wanted from the OP1 originally but didn't quite find. And to be honest, whenever I use it, I enjoy creating loops that I can sit there and listen to for hours and tweak and play about with the performative elements. That is particularly the case actually because I've got the Rumble pack installed, and that adds this whole extra dynamic and element where even with headphones on, you feel the bass and the kick drum through the haptic feedback on the OPZ, and it has this full kind of almost immersive thing which I've yet to experience on any other kind of bit of musical hardware like this, and that in of itself is almost enough to make me want to keep it. However, I'm trying to be strict, so it has to go. The two main reasons that I've decided to get rid of the OPZ are, firstly, that even though I like the tunes and the loops and stuff that I come up with, I never actually do anything with the music that I make on it. Now, if that was the only issue that I had, then it wouldn't really be an issue at all, because music isn't something that you always have to share. You know, you don't have to sit down, play your piano and think, oh fuck, this is a total waste of time if I'm not going to be able to upload a YouTube video to show everybody how great I am. You can have fun just making music or enjoying the process of that kind of thing without having to always upload it and feel some kind of undulating praise from the world. However, that isn't the only issue that I've had with the OPZ, because even though it's portable and I can take it on the plane and I can write all these tracks and everything else, the reality is that it isn't that intuitive to use. As soon as you get beyond the kind of basic functions, everything else requires kind of key combinations and remembering what lights do what, and unless you have like an accompanying iPad or like a screen and are using the mobile app, it's almost impossible to remember what functions do what. And in some ways that can be a joy, or maybe not a joy, but it can lead you to kind of surprises in the sense that things happen in ways you don't quite expect. But to be honest, in some ways I think that's a bit of a fucking cop-out, because a lot of the basic kind of functions that you want are hidden behind these combinations, and so it isn't really something that I can regularly pick up every couple of weeks and, you know, just make, you know, enjoy the process of making music, because I then have to fucking remember what combination triggers the filter, and ugh, it's become too much. The next bit of gear that I'm planning to sell is a wee bit of a different one, and that is the Squarp Pyramid. This is one of the more original Squarp Pyramids. It is serial number 654, apparently. I'm just seeing that in the back here for the first time ever. And this is one that I'm not selling because I dislike it or because I don't use it anymore, because I actually use this all the time, or at least did until fairly recently. But I'm selling this because I've upgraded to the Hapax. And the Hapax is essentially the spiritual successor of the Squarp Pyramid, and it has much more in the way of features and controls in there. It's got a whole grid with different pads on it, and that really kind of has taken over as my main sequencing brain, and so it doesn't really make sense for me to have this thing sitting around anymore, and I'm going to move on to try and scrape some cash back and see what I can do with it. I had to go find this in the cupboard, which shows you how little use it's been getting. But anyway, this sale is not going to be a particularly sad one, maybe more of a shameful one, and that is that I am planning to sell the Roland SP404SX. Now, the reason that this won't be a particularly sad sale is because I have almost literally never used this thing. It is one of those purchases that I got or made because I had been using the SP202 for some time, which is here. This is the older version of the SP404, if you're not familiar with it. This has got such a good character to it, and I've been sampling vinyl in here and pitch shifting it and all that kind of thing, and it just was so much fun to use. And so I thought, logically, surely, if I get an SP404, then that'll be the natural successor to the 202, and I'll be able to do more with it. And in reality, I just didn't like the 404. It never really clicked with me. I know people use it for effects and everything else, but I've had no real inclination to use it. I haven't found it exciting, haven't found it interesting. I don't really enjoy using it for the effects. And so rather than leaving it to gather dust for another 2 years whilst I trick myself into thinking that I'm going to do something with it, I'm just going to sell the fucking thing, make a big loss, and hopefully get some more discipline into my my life in future. The next item of gear that I'm going to be selling in 2023 is kind of related to the last one in the sense that it is linked to the 202, and that is because it is the DR202, which is the Roland Groove Box. Now, as a collector of musical devices, this sale is kind of hesitant because this is a beautiful old thing. I mean, just look at the colour scheme on it. It is a piece of kind of musical history in a sense, and there's something about it that's really quite attractive. However, the fact of the matter is, I'm never going to use this. I love certain elements of it, but unlike the SP202, this is just not something that I am ever going to put in any of my music. I can't run anything through it really, and whilst it was fun to experiment with and own for a while, I think that I need to move it on for someone else. This is not least the case because these actually fetch a fair bit of money at this stage, and so if I'm not using it and I don't have a great emotional attachment to it, those are probably two fairly good indicators that you should sell a thing. The final bit of gear that I've got listed for sale or scheduled for sale is going to be the Boss BX80. If you're not familiar with this is an old analog mixer which was made in Japan by Boss/Roland, and this particular mixer had a reputation for nicely saturating sounds. So if you run a kick drum or something through this and really push the gain on it, it sounds really nice and fat and chunky. And I bought this a number of years ago to try and fatten up my drums. I was on a kind of quest to find different ways that I could make my sample drums sound a bit more interesting. And as much as I like this, I do think it is a really cool old vintage mixer. In reality, don't actually ever use it anymore, and that's not because it isn't good at what it does, but it's more because this thing is fairly sizable, and now I've actually got replicas of the BX circuits in my modular system, so I don't really need this because I am rarely putting in multiple different drums into a single mixer in order to saturate them. More often than not, I'm doing them one at a time through my modular whilst I'm producing something, or I'm using more expensive and more modern bits of gear like the Auto Boom, which I think is fucking fantastic. So as much as I like this and as much as I think it's cool, as part of my Marie Kondoing, I am trying to move on and let it go to someone else who will make much better use of it. So, goodbye. That concludes the list of items that I have identified as being least painful to part ways with in 2023. Hopefully that will inspire you to go on your own spiritual introspective journey. Perhaps reassess the relationship you have with your own gear. Maybe you should dust off that old Launchpad Pro that you've got sitting in the corner that you were going to use with Ableton but never quite got around to, and liberate it so that someone else can find use in it. Maybe it's time you accepted the fact that you're never going to be a famous rock guitarist in a band like you thought you would be when you're a teenager, and you should just give in and sell all of your guitars. Whatever conclusions you come to, best of luck as you go through that process. Have a great year. I am going to be found lying in a corner of the room sobbing, maybe vomiting violently after the bells, because that's what we do here in Scotland. Hopefully in 6 months I won't be making another video talking about how I've actually sold none of these fucking things, because that is entirely possible. For now, goodbye.